Welcome to the One Chart at a Time video series. I'm your host, John Schwabish. Now, in the middle part of the 19th century, Florence Nightingale created what would become called the Nightingale Chart, or the rose diagram. It's one of the most famous data visualizations of all time. And yet, that doesn't necessarily mean they were able to discern the quantities all that easily or all that clearly. And as you're going to see in today's video from Jeff Shaffer, the Nightingale Chart has both its pros and its cons. But you're going to see how it's also so engaging and how it can be used to attract people's attention and how it can be used to track changes over time. So Jeff, this one's over to you.
Hey John, thanks for having me. John asked me to talk about the Nightingale charts, specifically Nightingale's rose diagrams that Florence Nightingale created back in the 1800s. This is a very interesting and historical chart for many reasons. It affected change throughout the world in modern day nursing, changed the way that hospital sanitation is done today. What's interesting about the chart is the way that she decided to visualize the causes of death in the Scutari barracks. And so a little background on this one, and then kind of talk about maybe how to read this. Florence Nightingale, known as the Lady with the Lamp, was on the front lines at the Scutari barracks in the Crimean War. And during this 2-year period of time, there were 6,000 soldiers that died. And she kept meticulous data on the causes of death. And she created these charts that she referred to often as the wedges. They've kind of known today as the rose charts, but as a rose by any other name, it's often referred to as a polar area diagram. I've seen people call it a coxcomb chart because of the coxcomb papers. That sort of is a nickname, not really a correct name of the chart, but a rose diagram or a polar area diagram is probably the most correct name. And people have done variations where turning it into a donut and calling it by even other names. In her original chart, what I find interesting about this is it's the cyclical nature of the data. It's charting data that is in a pattern of months. And she starts the data collection in July of what you see, 1854, on the right-hand side. And up here, you'll see it starting there and goes around the circle, July to August and September and so on, until it reaches the March of 1855. And then there's a line drawn that we can follow across her diagram to the following year of April 1855 that then you can compare to the previous year. And so this is a year-over-year comparison in sort of a circular format around these wedges around a circle. The colors represent the cause of mortality. Specifically, the pink reddish color is from war, activities of battle. But the larger wedge that's blue or grayish blue is complications of death, things that happen in the hospital. And that's what's really interesting about this particular data. There's a great paper on this called Speaking of Graphics in 2006, done by Dr. Paul Louis. And in chapter 5, he specifically talks about Florence Nightingale's polar area diagrams and really goes into how these wedges are created and why it worked. And he also creates an alternative that really caught my eye. One of the drawbacks of something like a chart like this is that it doesn't work with the way that we perceive information. It doesn't work to our strengths. And so trying to gauge something, trying to estimate the size of something that's going around in a circle, comparing wedge to wedge, area of the wedge, is going to be very difficult, and especially because it's stacked. And so you have it starting in one place and ending in another. In this diagram, interesting enough, we flattened it out into a bar chart and to show the rate at which soldiers were dying. And what's fascinating about this is you were better off at that point in time in the war to be on the front lines than to actually go to the hospital if you were wounded. Your mortality rate was actually better just to stay on the front lines. You'd have a better chance of surviving. And that's what's crazy about this story. Dr. Louis says there's no doubt that this innovative design by Florence Nightingale produced the necessary change in the minds of those who held political power to alter the course of history. And that's what I think is important about this. This diagram captured attention. She created this form of diagram that didn't exist prior to that time. And so it was novel, right? It was something that people hadn't seen and therefore engaged into the data that they might not have otherwise done. Now, I took a shot at redesigning this into what I would think, today might be a better visualization of this graphic. And so this is my redesign of this polar area diagram, or the rose diagram. What I like to show here is that the death rate reached all the way to 427 per thousand soldiers. And then after the commencement of the sanitary improvements, draining the water supply, improving the fresh airflow, and eliminating the pest problem, the death rate dropped. The sanitary conditions were what improved the death rate, that brought it down by the end to the same death rate as a London area army hospital would have, versus a hospital like the Scutari barracks. So, should it be a bar chart? Well, I think that's one consideration we have to think about in this, is that it may. Now, that said, what is the purpose of the communication, the persuasion of the people, the audience she had in mind? And as what was mentioned earlier, it certainly succeeded in what it was doing. One must ask for whom they were intended, for what purpose they were produced, and under what circumstances. So that brings me to my last point about this, which is, are they useful? Is this diagram useful? It certainly was useful at that point in time. So as a modern example, I thought I would point to a real-world use of a chart similar to this. The client asked, I need help building a radar chart. And they didn't really mean a radar chart. They meant something like this graphic. And my response was, if this isn't related to geospatial data, then I really doubt it's the best way to visualize data. And as it turned out, it was geospatial data. It was cell phone towers. And that's what's interesting about this particular use case, is they wanted to show cell phone towers in a similar pattern. They sent me a diagram similar to this and said a cell phone tower has sort of a pattern like a microphone, polar pattern, in this case a cardioid. This is similar. A cell phone tower might have coverage like this. This was my first iteration in showing how the signal is different from side to side. And then I converted it to something like this, which is similar to the microphone pattern that they wanted to see. And each cell phone tower has a different pattern in this case. Now, this is very similar in math and in what it's showing. It's showing directional data. In the original Nightingale chart, this was broken out cyclically January to December, but in this case, 360 degrees of how data goes from the cell phone tower, how the signal is going out from the cell phone tower. So that brings me to, is the chart useful? If I'm showing profit and sales by subcategory, I would say probably not. This isn't going to be a great way to show this data. If I'm showing cell phone, coverage data from a tower, it worked actually really well. Not in that exact format, but something very similar. And if I'm showing cyclical data, maybe something similar to what Florence Nightingale was showing, then I think it might possibly have its use. I might not have stacked it in that case. I might have just focused on the part that was not the injuries happening from war, but maybe the complications. But nevertheless, I think we can say that her chart, the original rose diagram or the wedges, certainly had its impact on the world. With that, that's Nightingale's charts, the rose diagrams. Thank you very much for having me, John, and look forward to the rest of the charts in the series.
And thanks to Jeff for that great explanation of the Nightingale chart. You can explore more in various links that I've posted below about Florence Nightingale. So I hope you will check that out and explore maybe while you can use your data in the Nightingale chart. So until tomorrow, this has been the One Chart at a Time video series. I'll see you then.